This launch is to celebrate the launch of our Catalan poetics issue, which was published just at the end of last year. Your language anticipating mine. Um, we were delighted to be able to finally put a spotlight onto Catalan poetry. Um, both of our contributors today, Ronald Puppo and Marialena Carr, feature in the issue. But I know that Janani wanted to pass on a particular thanks to Ron, who also helped to guest edit the Catalan section in this particular issue and wrote a fantastic guest editorial for us, giving us an introduction to the history of Catalan poetry. I would like to apologise in advance for any of my own lack of last-minute preparation and pronunciation errors that might come. The format for the launch is that both Ron and Marialena are going to read from the poets that they translated for this issue of the magazine, and then we'll have a discussion about Catalan poetry. We would love to hear questions from our audience. We know the MPT audience are a smart one and normally great for giving us interesting questions around either Catalan poetry or broader questions of translation and translation process. I'm going to start just by reading some introductions to Ron and Marialena. So Ronald Puppo is a senior lecturer in translation, workshop leader, alta mentor, and has published many articles and reviews in Babel, Translation Review, Catalan Review as others, as well as book chapters. His full-length annotated verse translation of Mount Canigo, A Tale of Catalonia, was awarded the 2016 Sarah Dore Critics Prize for research in Catalan studies, and his One Day of Life is Life, the first extensively annotated English language anthology of poetry and prose by Juan Maragall, won the 2021 Ramon Llull International Literary Translation Prize. His full-length verse translation of the Catalan classic Atlantis came out in 2024. Marialena Carr was born in Tarragona and raised between Catalonia and the US. Marialena has been translating Catalan since 2022, so a relative newbie, after half a lifetime as a research oceanographer. She has published translations in Hyperion, Metamorphoses, The Common, as well as MPT. She is an alumni of the Breadloaf Translators Conference and was mentored by Julia Sanchez in the 2024 Alta Emerging Translator cohort. Ron is joining us today from just north of Barcelona, and Marialena is coming to us from New York. So thank you both of us for working with our time differences to make this launch possible today. So Ron, I think we're going to start with you to talk a little bit just about the issue itself before reading from some of the poets, and then we'll pass to Marialena.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that lovely, kind introduction. I can talk about my own contributions to the issue. Two poets, Giuseppe Cecca and Tonia Passola, and they are very well consolidated as poets. I'll talk a little bit about each one as I introduce them. All I can say is I'm just so pleased to have been able to collaborate with this amazing issue, and of course it's only a piece of the iceberg because there's so much there. But it is to be able to tap into what translators are working on right now, and it's like they're making the choices, and it somehow gives a real picture of what's going on in Catalan poetry and Catalan poetry in translation, and specifically into English, because we're seeing just what the people out there are doing, and who they're translating.
That's great. Would you like to start with reading one of the poets that you translated for the focus?
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, I'll begin with Giuseppe Cecca, and he's pretty amazing. He, as you can read about in the issue, he won his first poetry prize at age 15. Worked in a factory beginning age 16, and so he did his high school, secondary education, completed that at night school, taking evening classes. And he is, for many years, has been a very dedicated, not only poet, but also literary activist. He counterpoints his um, uh, his vocation as a literary activist and poet uh, with his bread and butter job, which is tending farm animals. And I know that he on Monday mornings he gets up at 4 a.m. so that he can be with the animals. So that's quite a contrast from really working with animals and the land, and also being a poet. I'll read I think it's 3 or 4 of his poems. The first one is, I don't know if you're going to show it or able to show the text on screen. It's called Suddenly Your Mother's Hand.
So what we have in the chat is a link to the issue. If people want to click through to it and follow through, they can do so via the link that Ed has just put into the chat for exact editions.
Okay, well then I should warn everybody that this particular poem is not in the issue.
Okay, all right. Well, we can maybe circulate it after the fact if people are particularly interested.
It's pretty straightforward, and it's a good poem to start with because it's well, it gives you the flavor of the marketplace, the open market, and a child, the feeling of despair and astonishment of the young child who gets lost in the market, if you can imagine. So it's called Suddenly Your Mother's Hand. Suddenly your mother's hand wasn't there that Tuesday at the open market. Lost and despairing, astonished, your well of tears gone bone dry. Fruit stands pressing on all sides, and cries of gypsy women, jet black haired, vending their ropes of garlic for a coin, and the potter's earthenware, and the fishmonger's olive tubs, till some acquaintance took you home, and your father hit the roof. That was the first of only 2 times that you lost your mother. If I brought up the second time, your well might not be so dry. The next poem is, we're moving in time. This poem features a grandfather. So we've gone from the young child to the grandfather. And it's really a poem about writing poetry. And I like to think sometimes the connection that he makes between generations, his grandfather and himself, reminds me of this poem by Seamus Heaney called Digging, where he carries on the tradition of his father, but in a different way. It's called Awkwardly You Try Some Nights. Awkwardly you try some nights to sketch the skins of words. It's like the easing ritual of wrapping pinches of tobacco, like grandfather before. Time will tailor-make the past, and you write like you're tidying drawers. The unyielding moths bounce off the light bulb that makes you a seer. They smash onto the paper with a crack, leaving on your verses the faintest scattering of winged dust. Now, this next poem is in the issue. It's called Friday, 3 in the Morning. And we'll talk a little bit about this, I think, later on. Friday, 3 in the morning. The night, deep, dark. In the small hours, an owl came hooting at the window. It had rained and the streets echoed the wet. Farther off, in the foliage of a tree, another hoot rose in reply. After a brief chat, the owl took wing, flapping in silence, the silence of the night. I recalled having lived in the woods some time ago, the sounds that had then brought me peace, out by the ancient dreams of tall oaks. I lay awake, waiting for the owls till daybreak. Or perhaps it was they who waited in the woods.
Thank you very much, Ron. As you say, we're going to come back to Joseph Checker when we get to the Q&A section, but we're going to turn to Marialena now to hear from some of your work. If you'd like to tell us a little bit about what you're going to read for us.
Yes, I do want to thank Sarah, Janani, Ron, and of course Petra and oh my gosh, Haley, sorry, and Ed in the background. But it was a real honor to be part of this issue, and it's a real honor to be participating in this launch. So I'm going to be talking about my translations. Well, I'm going to be sharing my translations of Felicia Fuste, who is deceased. She was born in 1920, and she was primarily a painter. We have here an image from one of her paintings. And she started writing poetry very late. When she won an award in she was a finalist, so she was the second, the runner-up of the Carla Riba Prize in 1984. It was like a lightning bolt, hit the Catalan poetry world. She was 61. She lived in Paris, had been living in Paris since 1951. She had trained as a visual artist. She, in fact, went to 3 of the 4 main art schools in Barcelona. She went to Massana when she was, she went to Massana. She went to Llotja when she was a teenager, and she graduated from Sant Jordi from Fine Arts. So she had worked in France. She left in 51. It was a really, really hard time in Spain at the time. And she's from the generation whose lives were very much marked by the Spanish Civil War, and of course by World War II, and how Spain took so long to recover because Franco was not recognized by the international community until the mid-50s. And she went to France, worked at many different things. And after she retired, she started painting and writing poetry. And she went on to write 7 books and to co-translate to and from the Japanese. She also translated from French. She translated Marguerite Yourcenar, one of her novels. I would like to highlight her uniqueness in that her book of where she co-translated Catalan poetry into Japanese with Naoyuki Sawada, was the first of only 3 books of Catalan poetry translated to Japanese to this day. So she was very much a groundbreaker. So I'm going to start with the poem that is in the special issue. It is from her 3rd book, and it's longish, especially compared to some of her other books, other poems. And this book, her 3rd book, came out in 87. It has 3 sections. It's called And Yet, y Encara. And each of the poems and each of the sections starts with the word and, which in Catalan is y, the Roman numeral A. And each of these sections, the first one is and if, the second one, and what do you say? And the third one is and more. And each poem, there are 10 to 12 poems in each series, is numbered with Roman numerals. And so you've got, this one is number 2, and then it starts with E, which is number 1. So some critics have pointed out that this is, each poem is starting again and is conversational. In this book, she is addressing almost all her poems to a plural you, which in Romance languages is distinct from the singular you. And more, too. And all of you are worlds. I may be just an aging volcano full of doubts, maybe the crisscross, aimless, of a brush flying over canvas, or nothing. I don't know what day it is, what space, what system. I walk with dazed bones and legs wasted by the yellowing, by the leaves that think themselves birds, and I don't ask for another sky. Mine is the illicit explosion, each day's quick hit or miss, and the moon cycle opening way to new alignments. Clouds of fresh sulfur flecking with rust at the flick of fingernails. I look for summer because hemlines rise, and yearning, the heart splinters. In the rounded brightness of public squares, I erase myself, and away slips that silence inside that sinks me. And what excess is missing from the frame of the door that closes memory and weighs it on scales of smoke? So heavy is the telex that writes us in bruising insistence, the dregs of adverbs. And all of you, whole and imminent, maybe you are still worlds, and you write by quill. I am almost of the volcano, just the steam and smoke. So be it. If I must go on, I go on. What day is it? I'll walk through the calendar clogged by eyes bewildered and emptied and filled with Modigliani green. Even if I take a dive and my own glaze over, if they're drowned, if they're heaped in salt, if the night strips away my stars. So her poems are written by a woman in her 60s, and they are very defiant. And the idea is that the enemy is silent. And so even though she will erase herself in the public square, the silence slips away and she's going to keep walking. And other poems of hers have this defiance, which I find, well, I love it. It's what drew me in. So I'm going to read one more poem, which is the first poem of her first collection, which is the one that was a finalist of this very prestigious award. She was a finalist 3 more times, and she won 1 award, but was always the bridesmaid, and never the bride, or only once the bride. And I think this was because she was a purposeful, and also by circumstance, she was an outsider. And that's something that really appeals to me. She never returned to Barcelona to live. She had a house. She had her parents' apartment, and then later she had another one overlooking the sea. And people asked her, why don't you come back? And she's like, why would I leave Paris? Everything I need, I have in Paris. She really liked being on the outside. And I think this was partly because of her experience in the Civil War, where not everybody, well, Spaniards know this, but people outside of Spain and outside of Catalonia don't realize that Barcelona was Republican until the very end. And in fact, that was the end of the war when Barcelona fell. And they were bombed. Barcelona was bombed by the Germans and by the Italians. She had something explode right in front of her, walking down the sidewalk. The war started when she was 16. And, you know, this was not fun, but she really felt that she couldn't, she didn't believe anybody, and neither side seemed to her truthful or real. So she just did not like political slogans, and she was very much saw herself as someone looking inside, not wanting to be part of it, not that she was being excluded. So her first poem is an invocation. I'll call forth the asphalt of the shadow, the teeth that crumble like stones into gravel, the Kabbalistic numbers of defeated skin, the dead again risen and without skulls, the lost and yellow gods, my unstoppable blood and more, so you may find again the drawn out light of the afternoon, the secret space where stars, novice and white, undress, the wind bees, the honey of clouds. And so you learn, not quite alone, how to get by with irons for fingernails. I'll call forth the bone-thirsty salt, the dust from the collapse of exhausted pride, the beaches of 100 eyes, mute and in the dark, waiting in vain to tie us down, the relentless singing of crickets, in thrall to the bogus starlight of the city that never sleeps. And I will give it all, and all for nothing, just to see you live. What strange obsession has me play it all on the dice roll of a heart racked and ruined, knowing that even if I were to win, I am to lose it all. It's not sweet. This won't ever be on a Hallmark card. And I like that. So I don't want to overstay my very exciting welcome. So I'm going to read one more poem, which is my favorite poem of hers, where the defiance is very clear. And also this kind of witchy invocation comes through by an exchange she does willingly. Not anymore. This is from her second book. Not anymore. Not anymore. I don't wear a cape to be the night bonfire or Saturday's party. Not anymore. My fingernails have dropped off, graveyard crosses of basalt. I've bartered my 5 senses for 5 startles of water, 5 descents into hell, 5 frenzies of jail and cage, and 5 continents broken down from sleigh bells and missteps. Not anymore. I don't know what's to be found in the magic wagon of any Ursa Major. If I turn up there startled and with bewildered eyes, who will steer me? What track will take me through the world without pine nuts or raisins? Time is yellow. Yellow the silk hand and faded. Leave me here. Never again. Here where I'm at and now. Helpless matchstick. Bring me moon for sleeping or a stake to tether my poisonous, my invincible voice. I have no edges, so leave me the sun nearby and the quiver of an iced lip melting. So I'll stop there. I really love this poem and her mythical exchanges, and the fact that she's like, yeah, no, I don't have any edges, but my voice is poisonous and it is invincible. So I get goosebumps every time I read this poem, and I'll stop there. Thank you again.
That was fantastic. Thank you, Marialena. Invincible voices are what we need more of at the minute, I think. We're going to go back to Ron just to hear from one more poet, and then we'll dig into some of the amazing ideas that both of you have been raising. So, Ron, would you like to give us your second poet that you're going to read from today? Oh, I'm still on mute, Ron. If you could just take yourself. Oh, Ron, we've lost you. We can't hear you just now.
Unmute. So sorry.
That's all right. Thank you.
Okay. Tonia Passola is a prolific and difficult poet. She's fairly she's well known in France. Here are a couple of her books. Bilingual. but for some reason she is not that well known in English. She's a native of Barcelona, and her bread and butter job is she was majored in art history, but she teaches in a secondary school. She teaches Catalan language and literature in a secondary school. I'll read a couple of her poems. I'll read one that's first from the issue, and then another one which is not. The first is called Desire. Desire. I'd heard tell that desire can come knocking at the door of no desire, and that if the latter is shut, makes its entrance inch by inch, and that it can spin a wondrous web around no desire, winding it in the fervent thread of the eye's gaze, and that at times it is a lightning bolt that bursts through dark summits, the rioting rock that strikes the high soaring imagination of risk, the not quite right gift that suddenly warms the heart. And they told her today she had a taste of that here tell, that desire will at long last flood the unruly dry of the most hostile of regions. And finally, a poem titled If I Do an Alice. For those of you who are wondering if Alice's can be done. If I do an Alice and jump in the glass and linger at play with the lineup of images, astonishing me with their languages of garment and garb, simple, rich, refined, crass. If the word sways with the jonquil in the frenzy of the pilgrimage, to join with the hardiest of thistles, savage, and become the feature of each offspring, if once outside again in the bumper cars, though I don't quite care much for strategies, I dodge, then collide head on with problems. Let me say on my behalf in this lark, I send packing the prison of schemata. It's all about guarding the soul of the poem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Guarding the soul of the poem. I can't think of a more succinct description maybe of what translators are tasked with doing when they take on the translation of a poem. I have some questions that Janani sort of helped put together, and the first one really is for Ron to think about the kind of bigger picture, I suppose, of Catalan modernism that you write in the editorial was really spearheaded by poets, novelists, painters, architects, but that their work was strengthened by lexicographers and grammarians. And so I was wondering if you could tell us a bit more about that relationship between lexicography, grammar, and literary creation for Catalan writers.
Yeah, thank you. The job of lexicographers, right, authors of dictionaries and grammarians, is lexicographers are word gatherers, grammarians are word organizers, and they both take a language and codify, classify, systemize. All this in the context of often a language community that operates linguistically at all levels, social, occupational, professional, literary creations of all kinds. That said, there are language communities that have fallen under attack. In the case of Catalan, the medieval heyday was rather faded by the 19th century, but in the 19th century, they burst forth this literary renaissance, which thanks to some outstanding literature that was produced in the 19th century after a lull of about 3 centuries in Catalan literature. So this 19th century literary renaissance, it updated, upgraded, uplifted the vernacular, which was Catalan, into a fully operative language community at all levels. The struggle continued. Ortega y Gasset, and especially Miguel de Unamuno, they wrote to Joan Maragall, and the Catalan poet, the outstanding Catalan poet of modernism, and they urged him to save Spain by writing in Spanish. As Joan Maragall made clear, he wouldn't give up the language. The language was something, if in the 19th century, where Christianity still, let's say the Christian ideology still had a strong hold on Catalan and other societies, the defense of the language, the defense of small languages was, well, that they reflect the diversity in nature. And so therefore they're part of God's plan. But when you get into later, the Christian ideology doesn't hold so strong. And so instead of looking upward for a defense of small languages, Maragall looks down, and what does he see? He sees the rugged land that gave me my language. The struggle continues even today, especially in French Catalonia, where Catalan speakers, mostly in the countryside, were shamed. The instrument of shame was used to dissuade them from passing on the language of the rugged land to their children, and they were encouraged to speak proper French. The visitor to Catalonia might be surprised to see a poster that reads "Love your language," which seems puzzling because our language, in this case English, in our experience has never been under attack. And so this tells us, love your language tells us something. And of course, getting back to lexicographers and grammarians, the business of codifying and standardizing a language that is struggling becomes very important work.
That's interesting, yeah, because I think if you hear the word kind of lexicographer or grammarian, you think of that as instinctively we might think of that as a restriction on language or a kind of conservative action in some ways. But for Catalan, in fact, it's sort of a radical act of support, perhaps, instead. I just wanted to go back to what you said about Josep Checa being a literary activist alongside the work of farming. And I wondered if you could just explain that term a little bit more, either for what it means to him or what it means to you.
Mm-hmm. Well, truth be told, he has his being a literary activist, organizing cultural events and book presentations, as he's become more and more established as a prize-winning poet, he does less actual organizing than he used to. And but yes, both, I guess you could say, taking on both roles of both the creative role and also the supporting role, that is spreading the word. So you might say he's more than so much spreading the word anymore. He's creating the word.
Thank you. I was struck sort of across the readings, this kind of aspect of multidisciplinarity, which seems to run with Catalan writers. I mean, Marialena, you yourself, oceanographer and translator, that kind of multidisciplinarity, but a particular crossover, it would seem, with visual arts, perhaps. And Marialena, I wanted to kind of come to you on that, because in your own translation of the the poet that you're translating there was Engage with Sculptures by Tom Carr. And so I wondered if you could maybe just tell us a bit about your own engagement with visual arts, and also perhaps how that linked to being attracted to Fuster's practice as a painter as well, and the role of visual arts in that poetry for you.
Yes. So this book, El Yo Oí, the I, where it is very witty in English. And so what do they say? Warning, whatever. Tom Carr doesn't just happen to have my same surname. He's my brother. And so Tom and my brother and Vicens had worked together for a long time. I'm going to show one of these works. They're around the same age, and they had known each other since probably the early 80s. Vicens is a poet. He's also calls himself a cultural agitator and a trafficker of ideas. He is incredibly productive, writing poetry, making anthologies of poets, and writing a lot of criticism and historical, just very tied into the arts. And he and Tom were in the early 80s were already doing things together, doing projects together. And Vicens first started, it's very common for when you have an exhibition, there's a catalog, and you have an art historian or a critic write for you. And so Vicens started doing this in 88 for Tom. But then in 96, instead of just writing prose, which he does very well, he started writing poems, and poems that were in dialogue with Tom's work. Here's an example of the type of work. What one aspect, Tom also doesn't just do sculpture, but these books, the central thing was an exhibit. It's actually a fixed, it's permanent in the Musée de Céret in France. And there are numbers, and Ron told me that he actually saw it over the holidays. And there are numbers throughout the museum, and you have to look for the numbers. And so anyway, I'm going on and on about my brother's art, but the point was I was a scientist, and because Tom, like me, straddles languages and countries, he frequently, and also he shows throughout Europe, and so there's a lot in French, and so he often will have multilingual catalogs and their books about his work. And my father was often brought in to help to translate this. And when I was around, I participated. And so I was kind of just drawn in. I say that my engagement with the visual arts is, I explain that I am the black sheep of my family because I was immediately tracked into sciences, and got a doctorate in oceanography and had a research career. And my two brothers both did fine arts, and other people in my family are also visual artists of various shapes, painters and videographers and art conservators. So I'm the weirdo, but I was always the weird word person, and so I was informally part of these translations that appeared in the exhibition catalogs. And then they got drawn together into this book in 2021, which came out in 2022. And they asked me, my father was no longer alive, and they asked me to please revise them and review them, make sure they were okay. And so I did that. And so that is, I am always drawn to the visual arts. I would not define myself as a visual artist because, you know, I'm really, really good artists in my family. So I like to draw, but who cares? They're so good. And yes, the fact that Felicia is also a visual artist really appeals to me. She speaks that language. You know, she talks about the colors a lot. Colors are very important. Shapes, shadows, light. I mean, Modigliani green. I mean, who's going to say that, right? Unless you're an art historian or an artist or Modigliani. You know, it's not something. And so it is a very, it's a very beautiful aspect of her background, and the fact that she was many things. So she was first and foremost an artist. She was a painter, and she engraved glass. And I can show you many images, but she is more famous for her poetry, which is interesting.
Thank you. There's so much to talk about, but I'm aware that at this point, we'd love to throw the questions open to the audience. So if anybody does have a question that they would like to ask, please put it into the chat or into the Q&A box, and I can pass it over to the panelists. We promised we would go back to Joseph Checker, Ron. And in your translator's note to those poems, you quote the poet Alex Sassano, who says that Checker's poems reveal the world that is the woods, which harbors an evasive mystery, but also a hidden complicity. And this is a question from Janani, that she was interested in what sort of complicity was being referred to there.
Thank you. That question kept me busy for a while. In the poet tells us he lived in the woods, out by the ancient dreams of tall oaks. So the oak trees dream. So it's a personification that connects. It makes a connection with the poet and also the reader of the poem, who may also dream. Another connection is that the owl came hooting at the window. And then that owl made a connection with another owl in the woods and then flew off. How did the second owl fly off? In silence. The silence, a silent flight in the silence of the night. So that's two layers of silence: the owl's flight and also the woods themselves. The poet then waited for another connection, or perhaps the owls, were the ones waiting, and the poem ends there. So why this personification? Trees dreaming, owls waiting, perhaps an attempt to reestablish a connection. The mystery of the life in the woods remains unsolved, just out of reach, it seems. And yet, and here the word complicity comes in, there is a complicity in the mystery that life is itself. Like the poet, like the reader of the poem, the woods are also living. And in conclusion, I would say there's a sharing, not the way we use share today, to mean communicate, well, like when we say thanks for sharing your thoughts. Sharing in another sense, sharing in the sense of taking part in, sharing in, taking part or being a part of. The woods too are life. They're filled with life. but the woods are silent. The woods are silent, nevertheless they are. And if we knew their language, they might tell us, listen, we share the same mystery of life as you do. So I think that's the bottom line, the complicity in the mystery of life.
I wonder if perhaps, and this goes to another question that we've had, which is about the phrase "here tell" that Ron, you used in your introduction to the Tonia Passola poem, which is that somehow there is a kind of, the phrase that you used was an unspecified source or a pool of uplifting popular lore that the poet has tapped into. And I thought that phrase, the "here tell" that you used to translate that idea of popular lore or connection or community was a lovely way of describing it. And so the kind of question that we have is there a, because of the kind of minoritized or maybe threatened nature of Catalan historically, is there a strong sense of community amongst Catalan writers, translators, and how do you yourself feel connected to those communities? Maybe we can come to Marialena first.
I think that the Catalan poetry communities are very strong and very because they're small. They're not because there are few poets, but because it's simply it's a language spoken by 12 million people. And so it isn't, it doesn't have the spread of an English, for example. And also I think people live all over the place, but Barcelona is very central. I think there's a lot. I really am not the best person to talk about this because I'm very far away, but my impression is that the connections are very tight. And I have to say that the Catalan translators that I've met are among the most generous and fabulous people that I've ever met. They're just, there is a lot of sharing. And I worked with Julia. You know, I've met some fabulous translators. I think that the communities are not exactly formal, or if they are, I'm not part of them, but I do think that there's a very strong connectivity. And I think it's, well, I just think the translation community in general is very much that way. And I find it awe-inspiring.
Ron?
Thank you. Yes, well, I hadn't thought of the let's say, I hadn't thought of how poets or translators or writers would, I guess, I can't really say they. I would say this, the here tell that I'm referring to, as you say, it's that it's the popular lore. It's the people who provide the strength for persons in need of help or guidance. It's that the lore. It's like our grandmother, your grandmother's remedies, that sort of thing, the here tell. And it continues in the same way that Catalan continued even after the medieval heyday. And so for around 300 years, there's no Ausias Marc, there's no Ramon Llull, there's no outstanding figure, and yet the people continue using the language. They just need for some writer or poet to come along and make an outstanding contribution and really bring things to a high point and legitimize, or however, I guess, consolidate it, with the people. The poets are the mirror of the people, but they also serve as a guide. It's like a double role. They speak for, but they also speak from the people. It's like being an American, I always think we the people, right? But um, it's true on a, let's say, on an invisible level. The language continues, and the lore, the popular lore, as well. Yeah.
The idea of the poets as the mirror and the guide perhaps takes us back to that idea of doing an Alice, if it is possible. I don't know. Apparently, we've been having a bit of trouble with our chat function, but we think that that should have been fixed now, and the Q&A box should also be functioning. So I would urge anybody, if they do have some questions, to put them up. Great. We have one from Marina Sanchez, who says, do artists receive any help from the local government? I guess, Ron, this is probably a good question for you, being based near Barcelona itself.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there is the Institució de les Lletres Catalanes, the Catalan government, that that is crucial in helping. Also prizes. The number of prizes is astonishing in Catalan literature. So they may involve actual money, or they may just involve prestige. But there's certainly a lot of recognition out there for to keep people motivated and creating.
So the question was about the artists, but I do think that as translators, we don't want to forget also the Institut Ramon Llull is incredibly assertive and very much a warrior for good in helping translation in many different aspects, like from their heritage authors to helping support publication costs and translation costs for people for publishers to publish in another language. They have stays. So, for example, a very important author that is being translated in many languages, they bring the translators together to meet. And so this is, those are just a few of the many things. And it isn't just in literature, it's also in the visual arts and cinematography. And so that is an entity that is very, very important. And I do think that there are also grants, many grants, and the prizes often lead to publication. So just to add to what Ron was saying.
Thank you. Also, just quickly, quite an interesting question, I think, from Marina is, does Catalan literature have a place in the curriculum? Which I think probably speaks also to the future of that language, or if you yourselves were exposed to kind of Catalan literature as children. Ron, again, perhaps if we can just start with you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, I made the move. At age 25, so I don't know about. Although I have worked in high schools and as well as university, and yes, Catalan literature, Catalan language, Catalan literature, of course, very important. That said, there is there's some political tug of war going on, because high school, secondary school is so controversial anyway. I say that because according to testing, the schools are not doing well, because the students are not doing well, and so there's a whole, like I say, a political tug of war, and sometimes some will want to reduce or increase the number of hours. But yes, most definitely it's there. It's there in secondary school, even primary school. Yeah.
And just one last quick question before we draw to a close. If you had to recommend one contemporary Catalan poet for people at this event to go away and read, who would it be? Mariel, tough question, perhaps.
Oh man. Yeah, no, can she be dead? Can it be
I think we're looking for
Felicia Fuste?
contemporary is the word that's been used. So yeah.
Well, I would tell people to go read a young poet that I'm very lucky to be translating now, called Greta Sibling, and she just won an award for last year for debut collections, and her book is very awesome. Now that is also plugged because I know her personally, right? And I feel, but that I just don't really feel that comfortable. I mean, Ana Wal is amazing, Gemma Gordas. I mean, there are just so many great poets. So I just throw this out for someone who is starting her career.
Right. Thank you. And Ron?
So will the person be able to read in the original Catalan, or are we talking about translations?
Oh, interesting. Well, maybe give us the original Catalan, and maybe it'll inspire people to take up Catalan to pursue it.
Well, by far the most popular, widely read poet in Catalan is contemporary, even though he died about 20 years ago, is Miquel Martí Pol. But then again, I don't know. It's difficult for me because I'm afraid I wouldn't be very objective. But yeah, Miquel Martí Pol might be a good place to start, and also Felicia Fuste. Now that there's some are you translating Felicia Fuste for publication, Marialena?
I do not have a book contract, but there are 35 poems out there in English now. Before I started translating, there were 10. And so now I have 35, maybe 36 with the one from Modern Poetry and Translation. And I am pitching the translation of the first 2 books. I think also it is worth mentioning for those who like Felicia Fuste or that kind of thing, from what little I've imposed or shared with you today, is Maria Mercè Marçal is also a very beloved, very strong poet and also deceased. She died young and tragically, but there's so many. It's just so hard not to be. We weren't ready for this one.
She's in English. Maria Mercè Marçal is translated
Yeah.
into English by let's see,
Clyde Moneyhun, among others.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of the name. Montserrat.
Montserrat Abelló, a poet
Thank you.
herself.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank you.
Montserrat Abelló, who, like Felicia, left the country, but then she did return, and she knew English, and when she was in exile, she was living in the UK and in Chile.
That might be, I can't quite remember the title, but that might be something to recommend. Something about reason.
Love's Reasons.
Maybe that's it. Yeah.
It's something along the lines of Love's Reasons, and it's excellent because Montserrat Abelló is essentially bilingual in Catalan and in English. And then Clyde Moneyhun has recently Witch in Mourning, which is also very strong.
Yeah.
We can throw out so many names. Ana Dodas also died. She died very young, and her poetry is amazing and is available in English. Complete, The Volcano.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for giving by Clyde. Such a reading list. I'm afraid we have come to the end of our time today. As you say, we could keep going. If people are looking for more Catalan poets, obviously there's a wider selection in the issue. If you don't already subscribe to MPT, then we would urge you to do so. The spirit of openness, of international solidarity, of interest in countries and cultures outside of your own feels to be particularly under threat at the minute. If you have been feeling particularly powerless in the past week, all I can say is that a subscription to MPT does genuinely help in a small way, and that it helps us to keep paying translators, to keep publishing work, which helps to keep borders and eyes open rather than closed. I would like to thank Arts Council England for their continued support of MPT, and also, as you say, the Institute Ramon Llull, which have also supported this issue of MPT magazine. We're very grateful to them for enabling us to put this amazing package of work together. Huge thanks to Petra and Hayley for keeping us company and interpreting throughout. Thank you so much. Also, especially to Ed, who has been working behind the scenes, and Janani, who helped to set up this brilliant launch event in the first place. And finally, Ron and Marialena, thank you again for being such great readers and panelists. Whatever hour you're going to in your day, amongst panelists and audience, I hope the rest of it goes well for you. Thank you very much.